Hello.
Hello to everyone. Let's wait maybe a couple of minutes to allow more people to join, and then we can kickstart our today's webinar. Yeah, so let's wait maybe a couple of minutes, and then we can start. So basically, I suppose the chat option is available to everybody. If this is not the case, please tell us so. But I suppose this should be okay. Okay, great. So 16 people already have joined. We know that following the link from the LinkedIn post is quite tricky. That's why it's better to wait maybe 2 more minutes in order for people to, any attendees to fill in the request from LinkedIn and join the Teams event. Okay, so 18 people have joined us. I think I will start with a brief introduction. Thanks to everybody that has joined the meeting today. My name is Mirela Tsagari, and I am the chairwoman for the AEC DACH section. Today, the webinar is also being attended by Ahmed Imam, who is the chair of the AEC DACH section for Deutschland, for Germany. On behalf of the leadership team, I would like to thank all of you for following our AEC newly formed DACH section. It was formed only back in November, and up until today, we count 200 plus more members on at least on our LinkedIn page. I would also like to share with you today that we were recently announced and honored with the Rising Star Award by AEC International as the most upcoming section and promising section in the world. So I would like to thank, this is the right opportunity to thank all of you. And the best way to celebrate that is basically to host today a very, very interesting webinar on project data visualization, analysis and visualization. So I have the honor today to host Luis Garcia. Luis is a project controls professional with 20 years of experience. He has a background in industrial and systems engineering. He comes from Mexico. He has worked in many different positions in different companies around the world. He also holds the estimating professional certification from the AEC International. And something that we don't know about him, and it's interesting about him, is that he loves to cook ramen. So he's gonna be our host for today, our presenter for today. Ahmed is also going to be assisting the chat. So if you have any questions, please feel free to add them either in the chat or in the Q&A section. We will be happy to answer. Luis will be happy to answer them. So Luis, I give the microphone to you, and you can enjoy your presentation.
Thanks a lot, Mirela, and thanks a lot, Ahmed. I really appreciate the opportunity to present this topic today, which I find is incredibly, is passionate for me. I love talking about data and data science and the long path we have gone through. So I'll take you a little about the story on how we worked on this data collection and visualization. So it's been a long path, and the topic of today is what we did and to present how this works in different companies. So um, we had the opportunity to present this topic in San Antonio a couple of years ago, and basically our topic was, the title is Data Collection and Visualization for an Improved Analysis of Historical Project Data. So we all hear about data analysis and data science, and it's always something that people find super interesting, but the question is, how do you start? How do you make sure that things work? Et cetera, et cetera. So we'll try to answer a little of the questions that we had at the beginning, how we move forward, and then what the status of this process is so far. As Mirela mentioned, basically the paper was prepared by Helge Schlott and myself. So myself on the left, and that was the better picture I could find of myself. And Helge, who is a peer of mine, I worked with Helge for the last 5 years or so. He's a super passionate guy about data science and analytics. Brilliant guy. He has also an industrial engineering background, which I think makes sense in these kind of topics. He is the brains behind the technical part. So he is fantastic with all of that. So we both together work on this, and we think that it's a very good topic. Unfortunately, Helge could not join today because he is on holidays, and he will be starting a new job next week. And something you don't know about him, among too many other things, is that he loves espresso. So we were debating about what should we have in our description, and we both decided to have food. So now to the topic. So basically, the topics that I will try to cover is a brief introduction about the topic. Why did we do it? Why did we think it's a topic that is interesting? How do we start assessing the initial steps on data collection? What was the technical development? How we transform all this assessment and development into something that is actually doable, and finally, what we learned about it in the process. So for many of you have heard all these words, digitalization, collecting data, historical data, and this sounds like very nice buzzwords that one throw into management. So basically, management loves this word. So if you talk about artificial intelligence, everyone is just, excited, and they want to jump into the boat and they want to do something, but it's not that simple. So you need data to actually do some data analysis. And the question is how you get this data. This brings into the digital transformation world. So everyone talks about it, and I think with COVID, we all learned that we can work remotely, and this is a very nice example. So I'm giving this presentation here to a bunch of international colleagues with very diverse experiences. And if COVID didn't happen, probably will not be so digital. So if you ask, I remember reading a joke where they will ask a CEO, a CTO, and a CIO, what was the source of your digital transformation? And they will say, definitely COVID, because, no one will put the money into making a digital transformation unless you're required to. So reality is digital transformation and data is a bunch of buzzwords until you actually start acting on them. So I'm going to start from the very easy part. What is a project database? Or in general, a database. So basically what we were trying to do with this is to start creating a repository of all our experience in projects. So it had to be systemic, it has to be structured, it has to be replicable, it has to be able to be self-sustained, and it has to be capable to be filled by lots of people, because if you have only one person responsible for it, then the whole system falls apart. The purpose why we wanted to have it is because we know that the only way to predict the future is to learn from our past. It may not be perfect, but it's the best we can do. So we have to extrapolate from our past experiences. And this is what data allows us to do. And at the end, this builds long-term organizational knowledge. Organizational knowledge means being able to replicate our projects, learn from our past failures, and make sure that we improve every time we measure ourselves. So there are multiple organizations that provide this kind of services for owners organizations, especially like IPA, where they collect all this data from multiple projects that run data analysis, which is very cool. But at the end of the day, that's IPA experience. It's not the company experience. So you have to compare yourself against a lot of people that may or may not reflect your current processes, technologies, and whatnot. So what we're trying to do is to make sure that this database reflects who we are as an organization. It reflects our experience as an organization, and it will help us to manage our risks, capital allocation, cost, productivity, and so on and so forth. So basically, it's a source of improvement for projects. Before we start, we have to ask ourselves, where do we are? How mature is the company? What do we know about our projects? Because a lot of people has lots of opinions, and opinions are very nice until they are sustained with some data. Um, so the first question is, I have all this data. I have to build a benchmark. What do I do? I don't know where to go. So it's very simple. Stop, think about what you want to do, build a gap analysis, and the gap analysis will help you build an action plan. Yes, of course, it sounds incredibly easy, and it is. But you need to understand what your final product is. The problem is, if you know you want to get somewhere, but you don't have clarity on where you want to go, this is where the gap analysis fails. Because then your gap analysis will throw you nothing because you don't know where you want to go. And then your action plan is going to be that. So, although this sounds incredibly simple, at the end of the day, you want to know which direction you want to take. And to me, the moment that this just came into my brain and I start to think about this in a more professional way is when I saw a paper from Bechtel. So Bechtel, I think that it was about 15 or 20 years ago, they presented a very nice paper where they were building their data collection for projects, and it was called "If You Build It, They Will Come." Oh, it's changed. So I saw that paper and I was thinking, oh my God, yes, Bechtel can do it because they have all this money and all these resources and they can have all these big projects. But then we stepped back for a little and we said, okay, that's possible, but what about we can do it? But at least I had something in my head on where I wanted to get. So honestly, that was a very nice inspiration for me. So how do we start? As I was saying, you have to identify where you are. So what does management expect? What do you expect? What are your clear goals about this? What is feasible within the organization? So you have to understand what kind of data is available in the organization so that you can start actually acting on it. Because sometimes we tend to go into too deep of a detail, and that is what also breaks all this gap analysis. So one of the big problems is people immediately jump, when they think about benchmarking, they immediately jump into unit rate comparison. And that is a very, very low granularity level. And if you are just starting, the best way to start is to go tops down. So analyze the project you have available, analyze the cost you can extract from your cost systems, could be any SAP, JD Edwards, or whatever. Understand how projects are reported, how estimates are generated, what your cost breakdown structures are, how they can actually be mapped to something that reflects like an estimate. And then you have the challenge because it's not only one side you're looking at, you have multiple sites in multiple countries, in multiple languages. So this is the first thing you have to identify. What is everyone doing? And the first thing to do is just get into the data. Don't stop thinking about, yeah, I need people. No. Jump into the data, start looking into the data, start understanding how the data is structured. Then once you understand your structure and you can see what is available and what is not available, you can start defining the gaps. And this is when we talk about the ideal state. So ideal state is if these projects in this region, in this sector can produce this information, that is potentially something we can replicate elsewhere. So that makes it very simple to try to replicate this. And this is when we start doing the ideal state. So let's imagine that our organization is separating the information into, oh my God, what is this doing? Separates the information into different cost breakdown structures. So they lump everything for civil into one block and piping in one block, and then everything else in one block. Then you have to understand how granular you can go into your analysis. So once you understand that, and you understand the system in terms of how the engineering maturity works, what deliverables are produced during the different gates, and then just see what you can get of your as-built information, because at the end of the day, your project database will include all your different decision gates. Why is this important? Because then you can start tracking scope development, cost development, and also rates development. So that is the beauty about it. So the ideal state in our imagination when we started this path was to create a common basis to analyze data and share the results. So we started looking first what we could extract from SAP, and we look into the kind of quantities and what the organization was talking. In this case, the company never talked about diameter inches of piping. They were talking about linear meters of pipe, and they were not even talking about diameter. So we had to start twitching some things to get some data that was actually sensible for us. So this is when we came with an action plan. So the action plan was to sit down with the different regions, explain the process and the metrics that we wanted to follow, because we wanted to get to certain level of data analysis. We started creating some data collection forms, and the data collection forms are, I can show it to you later, but it's a very simple form that we just built. We have tested in multiple projects in different companies right now. And basically what this data collection form does is it's a structured way that you always collect your data in the same manner. It's similar to what IPA does, but adjusted for your organization. And then we have quantities. The quantities associated to the cost create unit rates. And then we also have schedule. So you have the complete view of the project, because you cannot separate the scope from the cost to the durations. So how do you analyze that? In this case, we decided to go with Tableau. Right now, we're also using Power BI to do some of this data analysis, but you can also go with Excel. I mean, there is nothing that can stop you these days. So Excel is not the best tool. It breaks when it's too heavy. But if you have nothing, Excel is something that you can work. Now, the question is not what data you collect, is how you present your results. Because at the end of the day, the only thing that is relevant for your stakeholders is the outcome of your benchmarking. So you also have to think about how you want to present your data and how the data is going to be extracted from all these data systems. So in our case, when we started this process, we combined the data forms and we built a database, right? So in our case, we went with AWS. So we set up an AWS database with multiple tables. Each table represented one of the tabs in our import form. These tabs included the project general information, that's the metadata of the project that you can use to actually select the characteristics of the project. And that will include like project size, project location, type of process, capacity. We're including right now PDRI scores. So this is one tab. We have the cost tab, where it contains all the cost breakdown structure. We have a quantity tab that contains the selected quantities from the project. And this builds in turn a metrics tab. The metrics is the result of all this previous information. So we separated this into different tables. And now we can see basically how you can actually start collecting this data. And again, it's not that we are so brilliant. There is a very nice recommended practice. This is the 114R20. You can actually see it in the AAC papers. And if anyone wants, we can just talk about it. But this one is great because it contains exactly the same process we followed. So again, we were not creating, lukewarm water. We actually were following a very standard process. The challenge is you have to do the work, and that is where most people just fail. So we had our plan, we had our database, we had some templates. So now what is the next step? We had to get to work. So the first step is you have to start collecting data. So you can have a very nice AWS database, you can have a very nice Tableau or Power BI, but if you don't have data, then basically it's just pointless. So the first step is go and collect your data. So as I was saying, the way that we structure our collection data form is as follows. This is an example of the form. And as you can see, each one of these tabs down here, this one here, the project input. Project input is where we have our metadata. Cost input is where we capture our project cost, as it's saying in there. Quantity, hours. When we capture the hours, we capture the construction hours and the engineering hours. We have detail hours input. Basically, this goes to the next granular level where we capture the hours per discipline. This one captures only by phase. This is by discipline. We capture our schedule. And you can imagine, if you are thinking about metrics, that with the detail hours, you can calculate the engineering hours per piece of equipment, engineering hours per P&ID, mechanical engineering hours for designing a P&ID. So by combining all of this information here, you get some very nice metrics. What we did in here is we created a relational key, this one here. This relational key, what it does, it connects all the different tabs. So all the tabs contain different information, and they are all named as this key. In this case, it was our project number and the face of the project, because this is a unique identifier. So when we run this in the database, we always know which is the project number and the face. The inputs, as I was saying, basically, it was just going through lots of data and finding exactly what we wanted to do and how we wanted to collect the data and what was available. And that made us think about the right level of granularity. Again, after we started all this exercise, people said, okay, maybe you should get diameter inches per hours per diameter inch. Yes, of course, that will be nice, but who is going to provide me that information? If it's not available, then it makes no sense to even think about it. Use interfaces to existing systems. SAP, one of the very nice things that Helg started working on, we have Junhan also in the call. I saw her name. She was helping us to do some very smart artificial intelligence work where we were creating SAP drops. And basically through a very smart algorithm that she built, we are able to identify and categorize the cost codes, so we don't have to do it manually. So we just make a dump from the business warehouse from SAP. We run the algorithm, it does a categorization, we just do some cleaning, and then it's already connected to the cost information. We also had a system that was for collecting some quantities, survey quantities. Same story, we were dropping the stuff, doing some very nice algorithms and bringing them here. So that is the next level. So that is super fun, but if you don't have it, you can start manually. It's going to take time, yes, but you have to do it. And as they say, that is like garbage. You'd better know what you are going to do with it before you collect it. I can tell you it's very easy to start going into projects and pulling data and layouts. And then the question is, who is going to read it? So you have to think about what you really need from the projects. Now, how this was structured, as I was saying, this was structured in the AWS, and we had an SQL database. It could be also a very simple Excel. So we initially started in Excel before we moved to AWS. But as I was saying, this is basically each one of these tables is one of the tabs of the project input form. We have cost, we have hours, we have metrics, we have quantities, we have schedule. And all of this is what we migrated into the AWS database. The beautiful thing about it is that you can expand your database if you find that you need more tables, because this makes it very flexible. So let's say that tomorrow you find that you can actually get very detailed information about piping. So you can create another tab where you capture your piping without breaking your entire database. Another topic you have to think about is how do you normalize data? So you have currencies, times, locations, and units. For that, we implemented an index table. And this index table, we were updating with data from CEPSI or IHS. And this actually was bringing the project costs from past data to current data. So that was also a way to keep everything very nice. Then what do we do with this data? We have to present it. So there were two ways to present and shape this information. And this is what we did with Tableau. So with Tableau, we had this super nice dashboard that it was super cool for management because they will see beautiful colors. And I always think you have to make management feel like on a Sesame Street chapter, where they have pictures and colors and shiny things that, attract their attention. So sometimes it's not so much about what you need as an estimator, it's about what management will do about it. So in this case, in our Tableau dashboard, we have very nice information about where the projects were located, how many projects we had from each different phases, what was the TIC factor, in this case you can call the lang factor, the TDC factor, which is the total direct cost to equipment, hours per equipment count, and these hours per equipment count were broken down into another part later on that is construction hours per equipment, engineering hours per equipment, project management hours per equipment, and so on and so forth. So this was a very interactive dashboard that we could easily present to management, and it was very consistent. So how does it look a little bit more in detail is something like this. So this was very beautiful to present to management, because when we had a project, there is always this discussion. Is the project too aggressive? Is it too conservative? Should we add more money to it? Is the contingency too high? Is the contingency too low? So the way we address that is through making some of this analysis. So what we found out in here is that there is a very nice correlation between the average equipment material cost and the total investment cost. So total investment cost factor, which is basically the Lang factor. What this does is that everyone talks about Lang factor, and people say, yeah, Lang factor of our company is 4. Yeah, but it's not exactly 4 for all projects. It could be the average, but it's not necessarily for all projects. When you have very large unit like package unit or incredibly expensive piece of equipment, the Lang factor is going to be smaller, because basically a lot of engineering is going to be attracted by one piece of equipment. When you have a lot of very cheap equipment like small pumps or small vessels, you attract more engineering, thus you have a higher Lang factor. So there are very nice correlations you can extract from this information. And basically, as it says in here, each data point has a story. So what this is telling us is, in this example, the red dot represents a new project. So when we present this to management, we can say with confidence that this is within the typical projects that we execute in the organization. So it's not a super conservative project, but basically it's something that is achievable if it follows the same structure that we have done in past projects. So if management decides that they want to become more aggressive or they want to have a cost savings program, we can easily indicate to the management where they have to focus, because this is the first layer. So we look into the Lang factor, and then we can start drilling down into the disciplines. How do we go about it? And this is when we jump outside from Tableau, and in this case, we had this very nice statistical analysis that was only an extract from the database in AWS into Excel. And what we were extracting in here, we had our P25, P75, average, median, standard deviation, maximum and minimum. So we could select our data sets, as you can see on the right. We can select the region, the project name, or even the size. And based on this information, we can very easily compare a project that is in execution to something that we have done in the past. So this is a very nice way to start drilling into the details. So if management say, okay, this project seems to be very expensive, and then you can show in the graph that the project probably is not so expensive, it's actually quite competitive, then you can go into different layers and say, this is why this project is going in this direction. So you can understand if it makes sense, and even for a validation point of view, you can identify where you have to start looking into things. Once you become familiar with the metrics that you come out from your database, you can actually interrogate the estimates in a very fast and simple manner. So the data set in here was very convenient for us because, again, if we want to compare a project from a specific business entity, we just click a specific business entity, and then we can drill down to business entity, to the country, to the site, and then we have a very comparable data set. But again, this only works when you have data. So what kind of metrics were we able to get in here? We have from top down different levels. We have the project metrics, as I was saying, Lang factor, TDC factor. We have discipline cost per equipment material cost, discipline cost per total cost, quantity to quantity, unit rates, installation rates, hours per quantity, labor rates, indirects. So this is super cool because, as I was saying, it's not only a very nice graph for management, this is actually a very cool estimating tool. Well, not estimating, validation tool. My recommendation, don't build estimates using benchmarking. That's not the purpose. But all these ratios, again, are very well described in the recommended practice. We took the practice and we just put it together into something that is actionable and is not only a paper. But this was super cool because, for instance, quantity to quantity ratio, you can see how many meter cubic of concrete do we have per piece of equipment? How many meters of pipe do we have per piece of equipment? How many instruments do we have per equipment? hours per quantity. You can identify how many hours you need to install a ton of steel, how many hours you need to install a piece of equipment, and so on and so forth. So these metrics actually make your job so much easier to check. Now, how do we went about implementing it? Because it's very nice. We have all these very beautiful ideas. We have all the data. And then how do we convince people that actually it works? Because it's not about us. I think that everyone in the call is here because they are convinced that metrics and data works, right? So in our case, we had to go from the inside to outside. First, we had to make sure that whatever we were producing made sense. So we started looking from the cost estimation perspective, checking against past projects, checking against our new estimates, tracking some information. And when we were completely convinced, we went to the project assurance organization. Typically, project assurance organization in most companies, the main job is to do estimate validation. A lot of them go back to IPA and ask for information for doing validation. And then there is this conflict between, okay, IPA say this, your database says that. And again, you have to think about this database is your own company experience. So what you are comparing is yourself to yourself. It's like just imagine that you go to the gym and you run at 8 kilometers per hour, and then tomorrow you're running at 7.5. So you improve. But if you compare yourself to Usain Bolt, of course you're never going to be there. So you have to start little by little. You have to compare against yourself. So for us, it meant when with project assurance, making sure they understood what we were trying to do. Then we were addressing the organization of project controls, and that means global project control, so that we could actually get information back from the sites, and that people understood why we needed to get more control on quantities and what we need to get as-built information in a manner we could use in our database. Then we went into specific projects, and we have to start deploying the tool in the projects, training the project managers, training the project controls organization. And finally, we involve everyone, asset management, finance, technology centers. And one of the nice things about this process is that it builds confidence. So or the organization can very easily at an early stage define if the project is viable or not, can check if an estimate is competitive or not. If you're working with contractors, you can actually check contractor estimates faster. So you build this into the DNA of the company. So what it does is it makes it part of who you are. So these kind of data sets are just fantastic. Now, we go from the hard topics to the soft topics. So what do I mean with that? You have the hard topics. You have to simplify your process. You have to structure your data. You have to build your dashboard. You have to build all the backend information with AWS. And this is a very good question sometimes. People say, what kind of skills do I need to do or I need to get in my organization to implement something like this? So I'll say, if you don't have someone with the right level of skills to develop and implement a very sophisticated AWS database, or have some very smart and brilliant artificial intelligence like we had the opportunity to have here with Yonghan, it's okay. You can start with Excel. So you have just to think about the plan, and you have to think about the gaps, and you have to think about what you want to do, because you can still use Excel. It's going to break probably, but you can make multiple copies and it's okay. You have to think about how you're going to implement this. You need to think about who your stakeholders are. You need to plan the communication and communicate a plan and then execute the plan. So you have to transition between the technical side and the soft side. So you have skills, you have structures, and you have plans. So this is a very cool project. Now, when I say cool project, it means it needs time and it needs money. So a lot of the time, management is not willing to invest money because they think, why do I need this? Or you're already doing estimates. Why do we need to do that? Oh, we paid for IPE so much money every year. Why do we need to do this? So sometimes you have to do some hard sell, and that means you yourself sit down, go through the projects, build some of the database, demonstrate that it works. And when you show that it works, then management will start supporting it. So our conclusion from all of that, what we learned through this process is basically today better than yesterday, tomorrow better than today. What it means is don't stop thinking about all the road you had ahead. Start working. If you start working on it, it will come. At the end of the day, you can spend maybe I don't know, a couple of days just going through a project, extracting key quantities from MTOs. Key quantities can be very simple, just total pipe length. You can get equipment counts. You can get kilometers of cables, kilometers of heat tracing or meters of heat tracing, average diameters. Uh, Probably you can get some hours. If you don't get it, it's okay. Start building the database. You can always make it better over time. So don't think that you have to go and be the best of class in the beginning. You can start from a very limited scope and start broadening the scope. And this is when we thought that breaking the database into tables made sense, because then we were able to expand the complete the complete database to something that made sense. So what does it help the organization? And this was our selling point to the organization. We were able to identify risk profiles. So when we saw a project that was not competitive or was super challenging, basically we were able to indicate management that there was some kind of risk profile. It could be positive or negative. So they could have some opportunities to save money, or they could be on a threat to actually overrun the project. We can identify easily cost growth and cost overrun. So that means as we are keeping track of our scope, we can see if the reason for the scope growth or the cost growth is basically scope, cost, or if the overrun is due to malpractices on the project. It also helps us to learn about which projects were the best ones that we had in the organization. And it's just the beginning conversation of a continuous improvement process. So with that, I am done.
So thank you so much. That is so interesting. And what's really amazing with your work is basically that it's, as you said during the presentation, that you can start with a tool as simple as Excel and start collecting data. But I will leave maybe the Q&A to the audience if somebody has a question. Otherwise, me and Ahmed, we can jump in and ask our questions as well. Okay.
Yeah.
The
I'll say
first
don't be shy.
question. Yeah,
Yep.
don't be shy. I will ask with my question, so I will start because maybe give a. The first question I have is basically, of course, you created the project data form. So you started. How was the process with it? How was the collaboration for implementing this project data form into the project execution and making it be acceptable from the project management, right? How was the process? Can you describe it a little bit?
Yep. So basically, the first thing we had to do was actually fill it ourselves. So we were just the first thing we did is we went into some projects and we actually were going into the project folders, asked to get access to some project folders and start collecting information. So the first time we started working on it, we basically filled it ourselves. So we did not ask for help from the project organization because I was saying it's very difficult. And let me just go back. I had a slide about it. Yeah, this one here. So we were working internally. So it was Helga and myself filling forms and just whenever someone estimator was finishing an estimate, will say, please fill the form. So we were collecting all this data and nothing was coming out of it. So once we had the first information in, we were able to present internally how it worked. And through project assurance, we made sure that we requested all projects to fill the form. So we had to train the project controls organization. Then we were rolling this into individual projects because already executing projects, it was already too late. So we have to go back to, Helga and myself sit down and just pull the pencil on the back. But the new projects were already being informed about getting this inside. And then it was rolled company-wide that this was a standard throughout the company. But it all started by us sitting together and just doing data.
Um, Can you give us basically, if you remember, how much time it took you from the very first moment you started, like implementing the Excel file, started from Excel files, obviously, until this became a standard procedure within the company? What was the
That is a
timeline?
very good question. So it took, I'll say, about 3 years. So even getting to this very beautiful forming here, this one here. It to get to this form in Excel, it took about a year and a half because the first thing is we went into every single project, extracted SAP. We were thinking what is the right level. We made lots of tests about what we were able to get from the projects, and to get to this form, it was about a year and a half. Then the next step is when we started collecting information. So we already have some data. The data was in a very non-nice form because it was only Excel. Then converting this into this thing here, it took us about to get here another year probably. So I'll say it was about 2.5 years between starting to get to the first dashboard.
Yeah.
And
So
then, yeah.
we understand the pain basically of collecting data. So basically, maybe an artificial intelligence would go and search for the right data within the project folders. That may be the wish for the future.
It's tricky because right now, for instance, in the new organization that I'm working, there are multiple SAP systems. So the project controls engineer don't have access to SAP, so it has to come from the financial guides, and they have to do the business warehouse run themselves. So it's very tricky. Oh, we have a question. How do you ensure that the team members working on project are properly managing documentation and fully understand the workflows and processes? This is a good question. And I think that I know the person making the question. So it has my same name. So that's interesting. So one of the things we do is, or we did, was to make sure that we tested everything. We tested how the forms work, that if they break or anything. Once we were happy, we were actually documenting the exact work we were doing. So the first thing was make a very simple documentation about what everything meant. That means how the cost was defined. So if we say about, I don't know, piling, what does piling means? What should we include in the civil site development cost? So we made a very nice narrative about each one of these positions within the same table. And then when we were rolling out this first on the project controls organization, we did some training. Then through project assurance, we made sure that they were doing the training to the projects. And then the project controls people that was already embedded into the projects was already aware. So we had a two-layer system. So we built the documentation, train the project controls engineers, train project assurance, and then project assurance trained the projects, and these guys were already trained. So when they got in here, it was very well understood exactly what they had to do.
We have Louis here. We have a very, very good question here.
Oh,
Why
I like this
have
question.
decided to do that?
So Ralph, this is a very interesting question. So we tried, so one of the first things when we started this, the idea was to start with an equipment database in Cleopatra. So that was the first thought, right? So we approached Cleopatra, we started investing some money on it, we developed some templates to import all our equipment, and we realized that maintaining Cleopatra was such a very difficult thing because first, you have to build scripts. Second, Cleopatra is not so flexible, so it doesn't provide you the level of analysis you want to get. And to get the level of analysis, you actually still have to use Cleopatra as a database. So it's nothing else than a database. The reporting from Cleopatra, and I don't want to talk bad about Cleopatra, it's an interesting tool, but in our experience, it was not sufficient for benchmarking. Because when I look into this part in here, you could not get this information out of Cleopatra. So we just realized that by making it simple, and also by making it simple, we could put everything into an Excel, pack it into a manner that can be achievable for the organization, and you can build your own breakdown structures, and then you can report into any way. So we try to do this in Cleopatra, and the problem with Cleopatra is that first, it can build the graphs, but it doesn't remember the graphs. I don't know if they have improved the benchmarking table. Second, you become fully dependent on the tool. In this case, if AWS breaks tomorrow, I can migrate everything to Excel, and I can keep still my database. So we identified that this was very simple.
One more thing.
Yep.
It's also an issue, I guess, with Cleopatra. Use the tool here, what we have it, we do as part of the outcome. Right?
Sorry, didn't understood.
The line was breaking. I mean, what I mean is the data, what you have tabulated is including F1 and 2 and 3 as well, which I guess may be difficult case for Cleopatra.
Yep. So let me see if I understood the point. But yes, you're right. One of the things we noticed with Cleopatra is, in this case, by us doing our tool ourselves, first, the cost was we didn't have any extra cost, because in reality, maintaining this tool is super simple. Let me show you, for instance. The only thing we have to do is, I can show you briefly. We have our own projects, right? So what I do is I have the project forms to start, and then I can use Power Query in Excel and bring all the data into Power Query. And then with Power Query, it takes me like 5 minutes to get this. So the tool is a tool. I don't really think that the tool will make a difference. The difference is on the quality of the data you have and how much data you have. So I don't know if that answered your question, Ralph, but personally, I have to say I don't like Cleopatra for that. Oh, that's a very good question. So thanks, TM. What we did with that is we basically created one index within the database. We have, it's not shown in here, unfortunately, but we have one of the tables that is called indices. This indices collects the information from IHS and SEPSI. So every quarter or every year, depending on which one we're using, we implement the index, and then we run a script that updates all the costs to the current index price. So the beautiful thing about it is that you have the baseline of the project and you have the index price of the project. So that means that you are able to see the current prices, and you can see basically the ratios don't change because ratios are ratios, but it's mainly for the unit rates. And this is what I mean with this part in here. Here, when I look into cost to cost, this is an index. Index are regardless of cost time. So the market indices is only effective for unit rates. So it's nice because you can play with all these things. In Cleopatra, you cannot do this kind of stuff. So I hope that I answered the question.
I have another question, if I may. So basically, in the beginning, you started the presentation by saying you started from scratch, from zero. And as you said at the time, the only, for example, available information for piping, for example, it was some linear meters. My question is, a key metric for piping, for instance, is the diameter or the weight of the pipe, or of other metrics, basically. My question is, you defined your key metrics that would allow you to do the benchmarking or the validation process. Let's say, did you ask or require from the project to produce these metrics or to buy material and labor into a way that could implement your metrics, or did you adjust to the already available information from project execution?
This is the beautiful thing about it, because basically, when we started doing the tool, basically we identified, and this is what I like from this tool instead of Cleopatra, that we were only able to get linear meters of pipe, right? So we showed this to the organization, and everyone immediately jumped to unit rates. So the question is, yeah, it's beautiful. You want to have unit rates, so give me the data. So that triggered actually a change in how they were producing engineering. And that was also very simple to implement in the tool, because as we had all these tables in here, the only thing we had to do was change the table quantity, the quantity table, and add a couple of lines in there, and that's it. So, but we went the other way around. So when people saw the results and they say, "Oh, this is nice, but you are missing this." Yes, I'm missing it because you don't produce it. So it's a very easy way to push work back to the engineers and to help the organization, because when management says this, it's like, yeah, this looks cool. And you don't have too much problems to implement new parts in here, because again, on their quantities, you only have the average diameter, or we have average diameter, and we also have material composition. So with these two topics in here, we can build very nice metrics. So we have average diameter per material composition. We also have weight, and we also have percentage of weight of alloy materials, and we have the split between carbon steel, stainless steel, high alloy. So with these ratios, you can already build more metrics. So again, it's beautiful because you can just expand the Excel as the sky is your limit. And let's say that in a project, you already have some new information, you can expand the table, and the table goes into and the table is just already there. So you just press a button, refresh, and you get something already in the metrics. So that's very cool.
That's a nice feedback because, of course, the cost estimation and benchmarking is the end of the project execution, and basically we receive the data. So, so basically the change came on its own, basically, from your success. Yeah, that's a very nice feedback, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another question I have, and please feel free to jump in the chat and ask your own questions, is how, of course, you, this cost estimation department, and of course you had the everyday project execution and cost estimation activities. How did you manage the time, basically, to produce to start working on the benchmarking database and the system and the tool versus your cost estimation activities? That's a very challenging task, in my opinion.
Yes, I think that, what we were doing at the time was to make sure that whatever we started to produce as an estimate was already being transformed into what we wanted to get, right? So when we were thinking about the estimating system, we thought about the level of granularity the estimates have to be produced to fill these forms. So when we also had contractors engaged, we were thinking about how do we request the contractors to provide information in a manner that can be used in here. So it's not either or, you're actually working in parallel because you already know what kind of data you want to get. And then with this data, you can start pushing it to the disciplines and you can start pushing it to your work. So when you're doing estimates, you're already implementing it. And if you have a contractor, basically you can request the granularity of the estimate that you can. But this is challenging because if your contract says that it's a lump sum project, you are not going to get anything. So it meant that sometimes we had to actually pay some extra money to the contractor to deliver what we wanted. But to get to that level, we had to prove that it worked because my experience is that we end up paying sometimes between 5,000 to 50,000 euros on just to get the forms filled. So contractors can be very cheeky with that.
Yeah, obviously, that's the never-ending game between contractors and owners. Yeah. Just another question. I know I monopolized the conversation, but please feel free to ask. But was there any case, any circumstance when you had a project and then you ran your internal benchmarking, and then you did an IPA benchmarking, and the results were contradicting? And what happened at this case?
Oh, this is very common. So as I was saying, IPA is basically the view of the world, and our benchmarking is the view of the organization. So again, comparing to something very simple is, let's say that I want, and again, coming back to the running example, IPA measures the world, the Olympics. So it compares you against the Olympics, and this compares you to your local club. So basically, if you are running and you're running against any guy on the Olympics, of course, I'm not going to be super slow. So there is always going to be deviation, and it can be very easily explained. Normally, IPA says you are on the 1.2 something factor, so you are very expensive. When you compare against your projects, you realize that actually this is a not so aggressive project for your organization. And that could have a reason because you have always delayed, you have your systemic risk, and John Holman has a very good topic about systemic risks. So that's what you can explain. I see a question from Jay. Says, what schedule data are you capturing and what metrics do you calculate? So that's a very good question. We capture basically, we were lazy in that sense, and I don't think we have it in here, but we are collecting the same data as IPA. We broke it down in the same IPA form because in any case, the organization was already filling the IPA forms. What we're measuring is the duration of our engineering phases, execution, procurement, construction, startup, and the complete cycle. So what we know now is what is the typical duration of our phases, so an FEL2, an FEL3, execution and total cycle. And we also built a correlation between the project complexity. So when I look into, let me just see here. So basically I can define the project complexity to the project type and to the project characteristics. And based on that, I can say this kind of project will have a typical duration of so much and so much, because the amount of piping is on this kind of level, the amount of equipment is in this kind of level. So what we're doing here is building a very nice correlation between schedule and project complexity, because a lot of times the schedule is an effect of the project complexity, or at least that should be the case. So you can benchmark duration on cycles. We don't go to the activity level because that's, again, then you go crazy with details. And again, we wanted to do something that was feasible for us. And even with this, we already have too much data. Excel sometimes struggle. This is why we migrated to AWS. I hope I answered your question, Jay.
So you correlate between the duration and the cost budget or complexity. So you don't.
Correct. The schedule and the complexity. So say that you have a project that is very, very piping dense, right? So you should not compare this project duration to something that is a very big package unit. So what we did in here is we have equipment count, average equipment cost, and piping density as an example. And then you can build a very nice correlation about what is the typical duration for these project characteristics. So this is, and again, you need data to do that. Otherwise, you stay on the projects level.
Okay, so we are not going into details, like, for example, sub-duration for piping, sub-duration for electrical scope of work with a relation with the quantities or something like that. You just do it for
you can, of course, but again,
high level the complexity.
You can, but again, it depends on how much time you're willing to invest and how relevant is that for the organization. And again, the beautiful thing about it is, what it only means is you have to add files in the schedule tab, right? So we already have our basic schedule. The basic schedule is running on some calculations on durations. So if you want to add multiple sub durations, you can add it. It's only more data, but you have the structure, so the structure doesn't change.
Yeah, just to cut it short, it's related to the amount of effort you are going to invest. So and the decision on the parameters and details, it's subject to availability of resources and also what's the outcome. So personally, I have another question. So how you benefit this? For example, did you include this as part of the gate submission, like for example, review, DQC?
Yep. So basically, the way we were using this is, the way we're working is, before any estimate went out through the gate.
Luis.
Sorry? Okay, he broke. So the way we were working is, the estimate was reviewed before it was through the gate, and basically it went through the typical review. Still review the scope, NIDs, drawings, MTOs, and whatnot. So the typical review. And at the end of the typical review, we will do the benchmarking. So we could say, if we identify any deviation on the review, we could justify it through the validation, or if the validation through some problems, we will go back to the review. So we will give time to the project to fix the problems or to come with an answer on why they were seeing the kind of challenges in the project. And it was documented at the end of the gate, and then it was passed to see if project assurance, and this is where we had this very interesting link to project assurance, so that project assurance could make a decision whether the project was mature enough to go through the gate. So we were only telling the facts, and they were making the decision about whether the project should go ahead or not.
Yeah, it's basically just to correlate whatever I used to do in the past. It's really very helpful tool to spot check any.
Yep.
We can say mistakes in the terms of scope of work. If you find, for example, multiplier for piping or something looks at the low side, then we go and dig into details and capture if there is something missing scope of work, something like that. It's really something we can use for reviewing the estimate, right?
Correct. So that was exactly as you described, Ahmed. So I just want to, because I think we're almost over time. So Helge and my email are here. If you want to get a copy of the presentation, we're happy to share it. We also have the paper that we deliver on the presentation. Happy to share it. I mean, it's pretty much the same stuff that we said, but in a verbal manner. And you can see some example of the graphs that we were plotting. So like these box plots, where you can see the ratio of something to something. We were using also box plots in Tableau. Hours equipment per equipment count per TAC. You can see some of the tables on this is what we were doing in Power Query. So before migrating to AWS, this is what we're doing in Excel. So you can see that it's possible. The kind of filtering we're doing. So this is exactly the same discussion that we were talking about. And you can see also basically the tables we produce and information we were getting on the key quantities and ratios. So if anyone has interest, I'm happy to share it. Yeah, I don't know if there are many questions. Any other one?
I don't see anything else in the chat, but I think we can wrap it up. Luis, thank you so much. And Helge, of course, he's not here, but thank you so much for the presentation. It's always benchmarking and data analysis is a hot topic right now. So thank you so much for sharing so much with us and for your time to answer so many questions. Of course, to the audience, feel free to contact Luis and Helge for any further questions or for the paper. The paper is also available on the website of AEC International. It's available to, so if you have a subscription to the AEC International, you can have access to Luis' paper and to many other recommended practices on topics, on every topic of cost estimation or any other topic of project controls, scheduling, claims, cost controls, and a wide variety of information is there. And yeah, to close this webinar, thank you so much, Luis. I don't know if you want to add anything else before we say goodbye to the audience.
No, it was just a pleasure, and thanks for all the very intelligent questions. And yeah, so it was very cool. And if anyone has any interest, you have my email, or you can contact me through LinkedIn. And Helge also, it's a shame that Helge was not here, but yeah, thanks everyone for joining. That was very nice.
Okay, so let's close this session, and I wish everybody a nice evening. Thank you so much.
Right. Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.